The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. With the news at this time, I am Tiana Jordan. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. President Irfan Ali announces 2-week tax-free bonus for all categories of government healthcare workers. The Guyana Court of Appeal ruled that it has jurisdiction to hear and determine whether the High Court properly dismissed a petition by the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change's election petition. The Private Sector Commission lashes back at People's National Congress Reform's leader, Aubrey Norton, over claims that that business organization is biased. And in regional news, Barbadian nurses are still on strike despite an agreement between the government and the Nurses Association. And internationally, more than 100 persons are missing in Myanmar due to a landslide. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now the news in detail. The Guyana Court of Appeal on Tuesday ruled that it has jurisdiction to hear and determine whether the High Court properly dismissed an election petition by the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU plus AFC. The Guyana Court of Appeal's decision was 2-1. The Chancellor of the Judiciary, Yonette Cummings, and Justice of Appeal, Don Gregory, ruled in favor as against Justice of Appeal, Rishi Prasad. The Chancellor acceded to a request by People's Progressive Party's PPP representative of the list, Bart Jagdew, through attorney-at-law Douglas Mendez, that he be given 2 weeks to determine whether he would appeal the decision to the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ. The Attorney General, Anil Nandlal, endorsed last night and said that the government would appeal.
What is the next step is that the government will appeal the decision. We have asked the court to stay its hands until we make the necessary, or rather take the necessary steps going forward in the hierarchical structure of our judiciary. The court was kind enough to accept our application and has agreed that it will stay its hands.
Tuesday's decision means that the Guyana Court of Appeal could hear a decision of the Chief Justice, Roxanne George Wiltshire's decision to dismiss the APNU plus AFC's petition on the grounds that that coalition's representative of the list, David Granger, had signed relevant court documents too late for submission to the High Court in keeping with strict deadlines. If Mr. Jagdew does not appeal the matter to the CCJ and the Guyana Court of Appeal rules in favor of the petitioners, it means that the petition would be sent back to the High Court for a hearing and determination. Attorney General Nandlal had maintained throughout that the dismissal of an election petition could not be appealed. President Irfan Ali on Tuesday announced a 2-week tax-free bonus for healthcare workers employed by the government.
And in keeping with my promise and the government promise of rewarding you for the work that you've been doing, I am pleased today to say that the government has taken a decision to grant an across-the-board tax-free 2 weeks bonus salary to every single healthcare workers, not just doctors or nurses or frontline workers, so every single healthcare workers. We have taken the decision. It's a lot of resources that will be required, but we are making that investment in you, and we ask you to do of your best, continue to do of your best in support of the citizens of this country, your Guyanese brothers and sisters, and most of all, in keeping with your oath of duty.
Minister of Finance Dr. Ashni Singh says the bonus is estimated to cost $612 million and would benefit 9,200 employees in the sector. Minister Singh further indicated that instructions have been issued for the bonus to be paid before the end of the current week. The finance minister says in making the final determination on the payout to the health sector employees, the government has decided to pay all workers in the health sector. This, the government explained, is because it will be hard to ascertain which posts are frontline. The government has refused to collectively bargain for pay hikes with trade unions representing public servants and teachers. A 13-year-old boy of a Northwest District has died, and his parents and siblings have been sickened after drinking a locally made liquid product. Dead is Rondell Henry of Aruka Village and a student of Aruka Mouth Primary School. Those hospitalized in a critical condition suffering from suspected poisoning are his father, 35-year-old Ronald David, 11-year-old Kevin Henry, brother of the deceased, 4-year-old Kelvin Henry, brother of the deceased, 7-year-old Selena Henry, sister of the deceased, and 34-year-old Donette Henry, mother of the deceased. Police said that at about 4 p.m. on December 19th, the 13-year-old boy and his family members started getting complications of diarrhea and vomiting after allegedly consuming a local-made liquid product. On Monday, December 20th, at about 1 p.m., the 13-year-old boy became motionless at home and was pronounced dead on arrival at the Mabaruma Regional Hospital. The other family members were immediately taken to the Mabaruma Regional Hospital, where they were all seen by doctors and admitted as patients in a critical condition. According to the Guyana Police Force, a team of environmental officers and police ranks visited the scene, where checks were made on and around the premises, but no containers or anything relating to a poisonous substance were found. Police say they are closely working along with the health officials and investigations are in progress. Workers of the state-owned Guyana Sugar Corporation, GuySuco, are to receive a 7% increase in wages and salaries. The decision was welcomed by the Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union, GAU, which recalled a commitment that had been given by Vice President Bart Jagdeo earlier this year. The union, which is closely aligned to the governing People's Progressive Party, PPP, said the pay hike for 2021 marked a reversal of a discriminatory policy of then David Granger-led coalition administration. GAU estimates that between 2015 and 2019, sugar workers' real wages had declined by about 42%. The government had refused to meet with the Public Service Union, Teachers Union, and the Guyana Trades Union Congress to discuss wages and salaries. The Private Sector Commission, PSC, on Tuesday strongly rebuffed leader of the People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, Aubrey Norton's assertion that that business organization is perceived as politically biased. The PSC has indicated that it is not apologetic on its stance concerning the attempt to rig last year's general and regional elections. The PSC says it regretfully notes Mr. Norton's unfair and inaccurate criticisms of the Commission as politically biased. According to that umbrella private sector organization, it can only assume that his remarks were driven by the fact that the Commission, in the defense of democracy, vigorously opposed the attempt to rig the last election in favor of the APNU plus AFC coalition. The PSC had observed the recount of the votes cast at the March 2, 2020 general and regional elections after there had been more than one declarations by the Region 4 returning officer Claremont Mingo. The Guyana Elections Commission, GCOM, after court battles, eventually used the results from the recount to declare the People's Progressive Party Civic PPPC as the winner. Prior to the declaration, the then Chief Elections Officer, Keith Lowenfield, had delivered a third declaration, minus more than 100,000 votes, as he had deemed them invalid for a number of reasons, a move that ultimately the court had struck down. The APNU plus AFC had called the PSC a PPP stooge. At the same time, the PSC, in congratulating Mr. Norton on his election to the post of PNCR leader, said it has a number of expectations of him. The PSC says it looks forward to Mr. Norton leading a strong, responsible, and vibrant opposition, upholding the Constitution and urging respect for the maintenance of law and order as the leader of the major party in the APNU plus AFC coalition. Former President David Granger and former leader of the People's National Congress Reform has congratulated Aubrey Norton on his election as fifth leader of the People's National Congress Reform at the 21st Biennial Delegates Congress. In a statement on Tuesday, Mr. Granger expressed satisfaction that the process that was initiated by the presentation of the report of the Ad Hoc Advisory Committee on Congress to the Central Executive Committee in April 2020 led to the convening of a safe and successful Congress in December. Mr. Granger assures the new leader, Mr. Aubrey Norton, that he will continue contribution to the party and his commitment to the satisfactory conclusion of the party's reform process. Mr. Granger also pledged his support for the party's program and adherence to the party's principles. Police say they have arrested an injured male at the Diamond Diagnostic Center who is suspected to have killed 22-year-old Joseph Ferdinand of Friendship Squatting Area. Investigators say the victim and the suspect had a misunderstanding. The suspect armed himself with a knife and allegedly stabbed Ferdinand twice to his chest and escaped the scene. The victim was picked up by residents and taken to the Diamond Diagnostic Center, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. The suspect was arrested by police after injuries were observed to his face and body at the Diamond Diagnostic Center, where he went for treatment. Police say he is presently under police guard, being treated for injuries he received from public-spirited citizens. Meanwhile, the body of Ferdinand is at the Memorial Gardens Funeral Home, awaiting a postmortem. Police probe into the incident continues. The Health Ministry says a 9-month-old toddler is among 6 persons who died of COVID-19 in the last 72 hours. 5 of the 6 diseased persons, including the toddler, were unvaccinated and the 6th person fully vaccinated. The Health Ministry says it continues to record lower active COVID cases, but Region 4 remains the epicenter. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says 3 regions lead the number of active cases in the country.
For the cases as of yesterday, we have 761 cases that are active. Over the last 24 hours, we would have seen 35 new cases, and we continue to see the majority of these cases that are active being in Region 4, Region 6, and Region 3.
Dr. Anthony says of the number of patients hospitalized, 5 are seriously sick with the virus.
In terms of our hospitalization rates, we currently have 38 persons in hospital. 28 of those persons are at the Ocean View Hospital, with 8 of them being in the ICU. And we have 5 persons on ventilators, so we continue to monitor them.
The health doctor says 79% of adults, or 409,254 persons, have received a first dose COVID vaccine, and 56%, or 291,473, are fully vaccinated. And now in regional news, nurses in Barbados remained off the job despite an agreement between the government and the Barbados Nurses Association. The government has labeled the industrial action political after the Health Ministry and the Nurses Association had reached agreement on a number of issues. The association had called on the nurses to return to work. But, as we hear in this Barbados Today report, the nurses are not budging.
Still no settlement to ongoing strike action involving some of the island's nurses. Minister of Health and Wellness, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic, today expressed a willingness to meet with the nurses to end nearly 3 weeks of industrial action. But he hints that the nurses led by the Unity Workers Union must return to work to allow for the discussions in keeping with acceptable procedures. At the same time, UWU General Secretary Senator Caswell Franklin served notice that his members will remain on strike until the government and the union sit down and come to some form of agreement.
Nurses in Barbados engaged in strike action to call attention to several issues, including appointments, transportation, and uniform allowances affecting nurses, which were not being addressed. Antiguan authorities have served notice that they will be doubling down on making sure that citizens adhere to the country's protocols. This as the state of emergency is soon to be lifted and the threat of Omicron variant of COVID-19. We get the details from Antigua and Barbuda Broadcasting Service.
As curfew hours are removed later this week, bars and clubs will be expecting bumper crowds. Cabinet, however, has set an upper limit of patrons at 150. Deputy Commissioner of Police Everton Jeffers says Royal Police Force will be extremely visible this season.
When we come, we will not just look, we will be going in. We will be doing spot checks. Persons will have to show their cards. So those persons who might have gotten in without a card, you might be one of those persons we ask to provide your card.
According to Jeffers, this should not be perceived as a target on any operator or establishment.
We are not in the business of targeting people. There are times when we would get tips in terms of a particular business with lots of people there, and at other times during our patrols, we will observe. Because sometimes you don't necessarily need to see people, you see cars.
Chief Health Inspector Sharon Martin posits her department will be better staffed in the coming days and will join the police officers in ensuring compliance.
We plan to work along with the police officers when we are going out there to help us with enforcement. Cabinet has promised to give me 10 additional workers to assist in carrying out the surveillance.
That report from the Antigua and Barbuda Broadcasting Service. The Trinidad and Tobago Attorney General, Faraz Al-Rawi, is inviting trade unions and other workers' representatives to discuss the importance of getting vaccinated. Among those invited are the associations representing members of the police service, fire and prison service, as well as the Public Services Association, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, and the Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association. More from TNT News.
The AG is hopeful that the consultation will make the transition a smooth one, but he did admit that government did not speak collectively to the trade union movement.
What's the reason? People need to know where you are. The government received its information, assessed its data, consulted with experts, looked at the international context, consulted again, and then the government announced its policy. The starting point for any proper conversation is, what is your policy on this?
The Attorney General said those employed in the public sector will have the choice of being vaccinated and turning up to work.
That we are treating with a balancing of rights. The balancing of rights between those persons who wish to be protected in the context of being vaccinated and those persons who wish to exercise their free choice in not being vaccinated.
AG Al-Rawi also made it clear that members of the public conducting business in the public sector would not be required to be vaccinated.
Patrons who access the public service, people who come for services at the public sector, are not in the bucket of being asked to receive or produce their vaccination certificates. The reason is that we can control the crowds. So we can't control the workforce in a productive environment.
When it comes to the furlough of employees who are not vaccinated by mid-January, the AG said eventually this would lead to their termination or resignation, as the furlough period for an employee is not indefinite. Mahalia Joseph Wharton, TTT News.
In the British Virgin Islands, Inter-Caribbean Airways has apologized to its customers regarding the recent flight cancellations and delays at the beginning of last week, which extended throughout the weekend. The carrier says the flurry of cancellations created by the delay in concluding the certification of their new ATR-42 aircraft, which was delivered in July. The airline is expected to have its new aircraft online in time for the Christmas holiday increase. However, the ATR-42 aircraft is a new type for operation in the Turks and Caicos, and according to a recent statement from the airline, it still requires the necessary approval process by the Turks and Caicos Islands Civil Aviation Authority. Inter-Caribbean says it has since leased a Bombardier CRJ regional jet from the Canadian airline to fill capacity on some northern Caribbean routes, but this sub-service could not begin before this past weekend. The statement added that the airline has been working diligently to restore stability to the network and with little disruption. The management is confident in restoring the full schedule as soon as possible. And now for the international news, the latest bulletin coming from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. As many as 100 people are missing following a landslide at a jade mine in northern Myanmar. More from our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton.
The accident occurred before dawn near the town of Pakant in Myanmar's northern Kachin state. Local media reports say a teetering pile of rubble and mining waste that had grown as big as a mountain suddenly collapsed, engulfing dozens of gemstone pickers and sweeping them into a deep lake nearby. Landslides are common in Pacant's poorly regulated jade mines, and illegal mining operations have flourished in the area since February's military coup. Junta officials are believed to be extracting profits from the multi-billion-dollar business, with little going into state coffers.
Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has welcomed a recommendation from a panel of doctors that people over the age of 60, those with compromised immunity and medical workers be offered a fourth dose of coronavirus vaccine. Mr. Bennett said the programme would help overcome the Omicron wave. From Jerusalem, Tom Bateman.
It should be said, though, that the same expert panel only a week ago came out with the opposite recommendation and said that there should not be a fourth dose. So that's a change within that space of time. And they haven't released the basis of evidence for why they say this fourth dose is now recommended. One of the experts on the panel said that they just really lack the data on whether immunity wanes after the third dose and when that takes place, if it does wane. But she did say that the Omicron numbers looking around the world were terribly frightening.
South Korea is almost doubling its hospital bed capacity for COVID cases as the number of critically ill coronavirus patients reaches a record high. The Prime Minister, Kim Boo-gyum, said 10,000 more beds will be secured by the middle of January. Some public hospitals will now be dedicated solely to COVID treatment. At least 27 people are now known to have died in Malaysia in the worst flooding the country has seen in decades. More than 60,000 people have been displaced. Days of torrential rain left large swathes of Selangor and Penang states underwater. Some survivors have accused the government of incompetence over the handling of the disaster. Usha Danielle, a journalist who's volunteering in the capital Kuala Lumpur, said the authorities were slow to react.
It has been hectic and it has been very disorganized the past few days. Hectic because volunteers were actually mobilized to go out and help victims in several areas that were affected in Selangor. And it's basically more of a community helping the community thing because we didn't really get much help from the authorities.
The Prime Minister has accepted there may have been weaknesses in coordination. News from the BBC. The World Food Programme says it's being forced to cut aid to hungry people in Yemen because of a lack of funds. The UN agency said it would have to reduce food assistance to 8 million Yemenis from next month to barely half of its daily minimum ration. It said that 5 million people at immediate risk of famine would keep the full ration. The Sri Lankan government says that Iran has agreed to accept payments in tea to settle a debt for past oil exports. A spokesman said his country planned to send $5 million worth of tea to Iran each month. He said the scheme would not violate United Nations or American sanctions because tea was categorized as a food item on humanitarian grounds. An Australian landowner has been charged with more than 100 counts of animal cruelty after 21 dying koalas were found on a partially cleared timber plantation last year. Dozens more koalas were later euthanized because of their injuries or dehydration. From Sydney, Shaima Khalil reports.
A resident living near the plantation in Cape Bridgewater had discovered the dying koalas on an evening walk. The conservation regulator in Victoria State said more than 200 koalas had been affected. The landowner, as well as a forest and earth-moving business, have been charged with clearing the animal's habitat and causing suffering to dozens of the protected species. The defendants have yet to plead. Each charge can carry a large fine or a maximum 12-month jail sentence.
Many lottery ticket sellers in Spain are out on strike on the day of one of the world's richest lottery draws, in protest at their low rates of commission. The famous Christmas draw, El Gordo, or the Fat One, has become an established part of the festive calendar, with nearly $3 billion in prize money. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378 or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
To end the news, here's a recap of the leads. President Irfan Ali announces 2-week tax-free bonus for all categories of government healthcare workers. The Guyana Court of Appeal ruled that it has jurisdiction to hear and determine whether the High Court properly dismissed a petition by the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change. The Private Sector Commission lashes back at People's National Congress reform leader Aubrey Norton over claims that that business organization is biased. In regional news, Barbadian nurses are still on strike despite an agreement between the government and the Nurses Association. And internationally, more than 100 persons are missing in Myanmar due to a landslide. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the Newstalk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.